It's springtime. The weather is getting warmer. Flowers are going to start blooming. This is my favorite time of the year. I think of this as the start of the real start of the sales year. People start coming out of hibernation, including our clients. Let's dive in. Chapter 3: The Empathy Burden. The High Cost of Being a Revenue Therapist. In the first two chapters, we explored the adrenaline of the hunt and the cortisol of the rejection. But those are loud biological events. Chapter 3 is about the quiet tax, the invisible erosion of the nervous system that occurs when you decide to stop being a transactional seller and start being a revenue therapist. When you lead with empathy, you aren't just listening to a client's budget concerns. You are biologically tuning in to their frequency. You are absorbing their anxiety, their fear of failure, and their corporate pressures. To be a great salesperson is to be a professional empath. But empathy is not a free resource. It is an energy-intensive biological process that, if left unmanaged, leads to a specific type of exhaustion known as compassion fatigue. The mirror neuron synchrony. The secret weapon of the high-performing salesperson isn't a slide deck. It's a set of specialized cells in the brain called mirror neurons. These cells are the biological foundation of empathy. They allow us to mirror the emotions and intentions of the person sitting across from us. The biological handshake. When you walk into a boardroom in downtown Toronto to meet with a stressed-out CTO, your mirror neurons begin to fire in synchrony with theirs. If they are clenching their jaw, you might find your own jaw tightening. If their breathing is shallow, yours follows suit. The benefit. This synchrony creates trust. It signals to the client's amygdala that you are like them and therefore safe. This is how you move from vendor to partner. The cost. To achieve this, your nervous system has to process their stress. You are essentially using your own body as a filter for their corporate trauma. The burden of the healer. In my career, especially during my time leading acquisition teams, I realized that the best sellers were often the most exhausted. They weren't tired from working hard, they were tired from carrying. They were the revenue therapists for clients who were terrified of making the wrong decision. When you help a client navigate a complex transition, like the pest control company moving to a mobile solution, you are holding their hand through a change event. Change triggers fear. As the therapist, you absorb that fear so they can stay calm enough to sign the contract. But where does that fear go when the meeting is over? The anatomy of compassion fatigue. In the medical world, nurses and first responders suffer from compassion fatigue when they run out of empathy. In sales, this manifests as a sudden, inexplicable coldness or cynicism toward the client base. The saturated filter. Think of your empathy as a sponge. For the first few years, the sponge is thirsty. You want to hear every client's story. You want to solve every problem. But after a decade, or 28 years, the sponge becomes heavy and gray. It can't hold anymore. The symptom. You find yourself rolling your eyes at a client's legitimate concern. The biology. Your brain is protecting itself. It has down-regulated its empathy receptors because the emotional load has become toxic. The masking. Heart rate. One of the most taxing biological acts is emotional labor, the act of projecting a calm, confident, revenue therapist persona while your internal system is screaming with stress. The study. Research shows that surface acting, faking an emotion, causes a significant spike in heart rate and blood pressure compared to deep acting, actually feeling the emotion. The result. By the time you get home to Rosie and the kids, you have no emotional bandwidth left. You've spent all your humanity at the office, leaving your family with the empty shell of a senior manager. 3. The pest control ghost, when empathy turns into guilt. Let's go back to that 2005 BlackBerry MyMail deal. That story isn't just about a technical failure, it's about a betrayal of empathy. Because I had built a therapist relationship with that client, their disappointment wasn't just a business problem, it was a personal weight. I had used my mirror neurons to promise them safety, and then I was forced by my director to deliver chaos. The biological glitch. When you empathize with someone and then fail them, the brain registers it as social pain. Social pain activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex. The long-term debt. This is why that story still stings 20 years later. It's not a memory. It's a biological sensation of a wound that never quite closed. The Revenue Therapist's Protocol. Emotional decontamination. To survive a 30-year career without becoming a cynical ghost, you must learn to discharge the empathy burden. The physical threshold ritual. The veteran knows that the commute is not just travel, it is biological decompression. The intervention. You need a physical trigger to signal to your mirror neurons that the session is over. It could be changing your clothes the second you walk in, or, as I mentioned, walking Bosco. The act of interacting with a dog, who has no corporate loops and no my mail issues, forces your oxytocin levels to reset. Radical professional distance. A real therapist doesn't take the patient's trauma home. They use compassionate detachment. The strategy. You must learn to care about the outcome without taking responsibility for the client's emotional state. You provide the solution, but you do not own their anxiety. Summary: the weight of the badge. Being a revenue therapist is the highest form of selling, but it is also the most dangerous to your health. You are a professional absorber. As I look back on my time at Rogers, I see the faces of hundreds of clients whose stresses I carried. I see the technicians whose days I wanted to organize. I see the directors whose pressure I felt. In retirement, the weight is finally lifting. But the lesson remains. If you don't manage your empathy will manage you. In Chapter 4, The 30-Day Heart Attack, we will look at the most brutal biological cycle of all, the zeroing, and how the monthly quota system creates a state of permanent physiological debt. Reflective exercise. Who is the heavy client in your pipeline right now? The one whose name on your caller ID makes your stomach drop? Are you reacting to their business problem? Or are you actually reacting to their emotional state? Practice visualizing a glass wall between your nervous system and theirs. You can see them, you can help them, but their stress cannot cross the glass. Practice visualizing a glass wall between your nervous system and theirs. You can see them, you can help them, but their stress cannot cross the glass. If you like these podcasts and want to see how this ends, like and subscribe and you'll be notified of the next chapter. Thank you for joining. Until next time, happy selling and have a fantastic week.